Welcome to night number 21 of History Bedtime Stories in bed, in our pajamas. Tonight I want to talk about a vacation that turns into a newspaper article, that turns into a museum, that turns into an internet challenge. This all starts in 1881 when James E. Scripps, founder of the Detroit Evening News, which becomes the Detroit News newspaper, takes a 5-month vacation of Europe. He sees the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, and as he's on this trip, he's writing a journal about the art and museums he's experiencing. And that starts being published as a weekly segment in his newspaper. And it's really popular. People get really into it. So it's later reworked. They add more images. They make it a little more narrative as a book called My 5 Months Abroad. And during this time, James E. Scripps has a newspaper manager named William H. Brannely. And Brannely sort of sees all this happening and he's like, there's a big market for art in Detroit. People want great museums. They want great art. And he talks his boss into giving him some money and letting him display all of the artwork that James E. Scripps had collected on this 5-month tour of Europe. It's done in 1883 with the help of a lot of Detroit industrialists who are all kind of convinced to loan some artwork, give some money. Guys like George Scripps, James's brother, Dexter Ferry, Russell Elger, Hiram Walker, who owned Canadian Club Whiskey, and David Whitney Jr., the great lumber and stone baron. These guys all come together, they found this committee, and they have this loaned art exhibit. And it's the thing to do. It's the most popular event of the season. Everybody in Michigan who can make it goes. It sees hundreds of thousands of visitors, and it really blows away anyone's expectation. But it lays the groundwork that Detroit, as a great world city, as a great American city, it needs an art museum. So in 1888, 70 pieces of art from Scripps' trip through Europe are combined with donated pieces from some of Detroit's most wealthy industrialists and tycoons, and the Detroit Museum of Art is founded. It opens in its first building on Jefferson Avenue. That building remains until 1960 when it's demolished for progress. Dumb. In 1919, the board of directors, which there's actually this killer painting that's still in the collection of the Detroit Institute of Art today, showing all of the original directors, they decide to change the name. It becomes the Detroit Institute of Art, known locally and lovingly as the DIA, in 1919. In 1927, on October 7th, the Woodward Avenue building, which is the current building of the DIA, is open to the public for the first time. And that same year, ownership is transferred from the committee, the board of directors, to the city of Detroit, making the Detroit Institute of Arts one of the largest municipally held art museums in the entire world. The support for the museum really comes from philanthropists at this time. You got guys like Charles Lang Freer, the Fords, the Dodges, and the Firestones really growing the collection. And you start seeing what these industrialists really loved in art by what they're donating and collecting. In 1914, the DIA holds a distinction they should be very proud of. They're one of the first museums in the world to start returning looted Nazi artwork from World War II, art that had been stolen or confiscated by the German Nazi army from oftentimes Jewish owners. This artwork was then sold at a profit. The DIA realizes that they have a Monet that was stolen, and they not only return it, but they offer restitution for the painting. In 1960s Detroit, we're kind of going through this weird moment where funds are starting to dry up for cultural museums, but at the same time, the DIA needs to expand. They're only showing about 5% of their collection because their building is too small. So in 1966 and again in 1971, wings are added to the Woodward Avenue building. The north and south wings, when they're completed, nearly give 40% more display space to the museum, as well as adding larger and more modern conservation areas. In 1975, the financial struggle hit home at the DIA really in the first major way. The museum's forced to close for 3 weeks in June of 1975. In the end, the state comes in and starts offering massive financial support to the museum. And then individual donors like the great Eleanor Ford, who herself donates $1 million to the DIA, really bolster it through the remainder of the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. Today, the Detroit Institute of Art is supported with a millage on a 3-county area of Detroit. Those 3 counties now receive free admission to the museum, as well as supplying really high quality field trips to kids in the public schools of all of those counties and cities. The museum itself gets some pretty big donations over the years. One of my favorite bequests comes from one of my favorite Detroit families, Mr. Robert Hudson Tannehill, who was a member of the Hudson department store family, dies in 1970, and he made old bones. He lived a long life, but when he passes, he leaves an insanely huge, insanely valuable collection to the DIA, made up of European artists like Cézanne, Van Gogh, Diego Rivera, and Picasso. This exhibit is considered to be world class. It also includes something the museum hadn't formerly had: German Expressionism and African art. Both collections still remain huge and very prominent at the DIA. The museum's also had some funny moments. In 2006, a 12-year-old boy stuck his bubble gum to a $1.5 million Helen Frankenkeller's painting. It was an abstract work called The Bay, done in 1963. The painting obviously had to be taken off the wall, and thank goodness for the conservation lab that was built into the south wing in the 1960s. The painting remains in conservation for about 3 months before being rehung in June to quite an auspicious and well-received gallery, as everybody kind of wanted to go see the painting that was damaged by a 12-year-old kid. But today, not only does the DIA remain one of the most prominent art museums in the world, it's part of a challenge. The Getty Museum threw down the gauntlet, challenging Americans who are self-isolating or in quarantine to try to recreate famous works of art from things around their house. As the Getty Museum is doing this on Twitter, Facebook, and on Instagram, we thought we'd join in. We talked 3 of our guides into participating. And now here's our challenge to you. Using only things you've got in the house, getting really creative, recreate a painting from the Detroit Institute of Arts. Up in the description of this video, I'll put a link to their digital collection. And if you put those pictures down below in the comments, we will reward every single person who participates with a super cool vinyl hologram sticker of the seal of the city of Detroit. Get creative, get artistic, wash your hands, and we'll see you tomorrow night.